So we're going to be talking about the alternative payments market in Asia Pacific, which I think is fair to say is probably the most fascinating and fast evolving of its kind in the world. And one of the things we'll sort of start talking about is the role of DCB in this kind of fast evolving market. Now that DCB is kind of like is sitting alongside, this plethora of other alternative payments, and who best to have on this panel or on this session than Boku, because Boku, I think it's fair to say, you're one of the biggest DCB aggregators, if not the biggest,
Yeah.
and you also have become a very big aggregator of digital wallets and other local payment methods. So, yeah, so I guess we can start with this question, what will become of DCB in Asia's increasingly diverse alternative payments market? And can it continue playing a role, or will it be, is it possible that it might be squeezed out?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for the question. I think it goes without saying that 10 years ago, the number of payment options that a consumer has, particularly for buying digital content or any kind of remote payment, was not nearly as vibrant and diverse as it is today.
Yeah.
These mobile wallets, as well as digital banking, have introduced far more choices around non-card payments. And that was what we focused DCB for, to give consumers a way to pay without a card. And the phone was kind of the natural vehicle to do that. And back then, the one thing on the phone that allowed payments was the SIM card. SIM card was either a micro debit or a micro credit tied to your either airtime or bill. And where all the digital content was headed were the stores, the app stores, Google Play, Apple iTunes App Store, PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, and the like, and making sure that consumers, when they go to buy the content, they had something that wasn't a card, didn't require a card, so they just used the SIM, used carrier billing. I think your question is, well, today they have so many more choices. Is DCB still relevant? And we were certainly asking ourselves that question, like, what's going to happen to Boku's business when all of these payments come out? And we, I think, did the logical thing, which is invest in the connections into all these mobile wallets, as well as banking rails. But what's been surprising is that the volume of DCB did not really fall.
Okay.
It doesn't grow as fast, for sure, but it's remained sort of like in slow growth mode. And what you'll notice is most of these stores have not deprecated their DCB connections. They see that maybe these mobile wallets are cheaper for the merchant, but they haven't actively deprecated DCB in favor of these mobile wallets. They still continue to give consumers that choice. Now, on the consumer preference side, are consumers just choosing the other payments and therefore shifting the share of checkout? Because even though you didn't deprecate it, or if consumers just stop choosing it, then you'll still see a fall. And I think what we've concluded, the resilience of DCB, is that with the app stores, the thing about the use of DCB, it's been overwhelmingly driven by postpaid phones. Especially in Asia. Asia is the biggest DCB market on these app stores, and it's mostly driven by Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, like a lot of postpaid phones. And wallets are really a prepaid debit instrument.
Interesting.
And with prepaid airtime, it was never really that popular. To begin with, it was either very expensive, so the stores never even activated them, or if they did activate them, the conversion was never as high as postpaid. And postpaid just had higher ARPU, higher conversion, more distribution, and as a result, when these wallets came, they sort of didn't there wasn't anything to cannibalize. Now the interesting question is, well, what happens when PayPay launches in Japan? What happens when Kakao Pay and Naver Pay launch in Korea? Jayco Pay launches in Taiwan. Did you see a fall in carrier billing in those countries? And actually, you didn't. And I think it's because it's the invoice payment to debit payment. Consumers still benefit from buying now and paying on their monthly bill. It is fundamentally a different payment instrument.
So you haven't seen any cannibalization,
Not on the rails that we serve, which, as I said, predominantly on the stores. Now, OTT subscriptions, they will at times just skip the carrier billing altogether. And so if they're going to launch in Indonesia, they're going to use the wallets.
Right.
But I don't, the reason there wasn't cannibalization is because I think with prepaid phones, they never drove that much of our volume. Like in India, like a prepaid phone never drove that much volume at all.
Right.
So, bringing in something like UPI, there wasn't anything there to cannibalize.
So are you saying that in predominantly prepaid markets, DCB, it never really sort of fully took off in the environments in which you operate, sort of enabling the app stores and...
That's right. And the app stores are, higher dollar kind of purchases in the app stores or subscriptions like a Netflix, like a Spotify. It was more reliant on postpaid phones.
Okay. And so with the wallets themselves, okay, what I found quite surprising when I started looking at, the App Store, and that's Apple and Google Play and even Netflix are sort of hooked up to in terms of, sort of like local wallets. Because the assumption is that quite often is that these wallets are usually not set up for subscriptions, or that they're not, or they have sort of bigger fish to fry than sort of like, focusing on digital merchants. But it seems to me that actually, if these sort of big merchants are already hooking up to them, most of the wallets are already sort of set up for digital merchants. Because in Africa, it's still a big issue with mobile money. So, but in Asia, it's a kind of...
I think there's a couple angles to play here. One, with digital as a sector, we're kind of at the forefront of using what I call tokenized flow or merchant-initiated transactions. A lot of people would call it a zero-tap or one-tap purchase experience, where you're just saving the phone, just like you save a card number, and allow the merchants to seamlessly charge. That's why it was so important for Boku to migrate from PSMS to DCB, because DCB had this characteristic, and that's why the app stores were eager to load that on, instead of, say, the traditional alternative payments of net banking. And even today, with real-time banking, supporting that kind of direct debit flow is still not widely available. And so wallets had an advantage there. To your other question, do they have bigger fish to fry? When the wallets first come out, they're trying to acquire as much users as possible. A lot of that came through the point of sale, QR payments, a lot of deals, a lot of promotions, getting everybody to sort of adopt it. But those were pretty low margin, sometimes even loss leading, whereas the digital purchases actually had margin. There was actually a higher willingness for the merchants to pay, a reasonable discount rate. And so digital was always important to wallets for that reason.
Okay. And so in terms of how DCB kind of like can coexist with wallets, is there any kind of like sort of supplementary, complementary role? Like, for example, the funding, so DCB as a funding mechanism for wallets, is that because I've seen some estimates, I can't remember what report it was, where it actually, in terms of sort of funding sources for wallets, the DCB sort of featured as like almost like 10% or something, which I found quite surprising.
I don't know if that's really possible because of regulations. DCB, typically is restricted to digital content, and so I know there have been maybe some examples with telco wallets where you might be able to use DCB, on your Gcash because it's tied up with Globe or True Money, tied up with True Move. But they do have these complicated restrictions where the money needs to be restricted to only digital purchases, and therefore, it's not a very good funding source for that reason. But trying to break out of digital is probably what motivated a lot of these telco wallets, right? Because you're going from airtime to e-money, and now you can actually buy a jacket and shoes and food and things like that.
But if they're sort of just like using DCB to top up, sort of prepaid credit in a wallet, the sort of stored value in a wallet. I mean,
so it would be it would have to be a digital, like a wallet for digital content. So it could be your iTunes wallet, it could be your PlayStation wallet. You could top up that way.
Okay. And so, do you have a view on what telcos should do to kind of remain relevant in this sort of fast-moving space? Like the sort of the digital payments and sort of digital economy.
My view is that focusing too much on just being the payment is kind of a dangerous thing. Even the mobile wallets, everybody thinks, oh, the mobile wallets have been so successful. There are far more mobile wallets that have failed than that have succeeded. Just look at India alone. There was probably like 100 mobile wallets, and they're all gone. And that's because UPI came out. And if those wallets were only built on payment as their business, they didn't survive. But if you look at it in terms of what you're doing for the merchant, are you allowing them to acquire new users and grow and monetize their growth? And that's about discovery, it's about acquisition, it's about retention, where payments is merely a subcomponent of that. I think that's a much healthier way of looking at the business. Even the mobile wallets that have thrived, if you look, it's not because they're just a payment method. They've become digital banks, they've become e-commerce sites, they've become marketplaces for on-demand services, they've become lifestyle apps, right? Maybe the term is thrown around as a super app because it's got so many other things, of which payment simply is a enabling plumbing there. And I think mobile operators have a massive audience, massive reach, being able to kind of do something different. A lot of companies try and acquire new customers through the app stores. First of all, the app stores is a good example. Like they're charging you 15-30%, not because they're charging you for the payment. They're charging you for distribution. They're charging you for discovery. And providing an alternative to the app store is there's a lot of demand for it. Even today, you were mentioning earlier today about subscription bundling. That was a really useful service for when music streaming first came out. And then video streaming came out, and we still do quite a bit of that, and working with. But it is about working with big brands. I think for even companies like an Apple, we've through telco partnerships have acquired probably 100 million new subscribers, and that's very powerful. And so the next hot category would be AI subscriptions. And I can assure you that we are also talking to the AI subscription companies as they look to monetize, grow, acquire subscribers, reach new subscribers, and telcos are certainly top of mind.
Yeah, and I'm sure telcos are keen to sort of partner with.
And it's just the beginning, right? Like you're not going to see a ton of music bundling, but I think it's sort of went from music, video, and I think AI and gaming subscriptions are kind of like the next category.
Okay. So, given now that this kind of all these sort of more affordable alternatives, what are the reasons for merchants to continue using DCB? I mean, is there?
Yeah, there's some tricks to it. If DCB is more expensive, with the app stores sort of did something kind of unusual at the time, and that was they didn't apply any discriminatory pricing. So on websites where you have a traditional checkout, you can use this payment, it's cheaper for me, so you're going to get this much content, but if you use this more expensive payment, you'll get a little less content. And so there's discriminatory pricing. Let the consumers just decide, and they just leave it on. But I will say that most those gaming companies will watch how much share of checkout their high cost payments can constitute. And so if DCB was like 5% or less of checkout, they're kind of cool with it. As they get higher and higher, then they start to worry a little bit. But as I said, discriminatory pricing, I think, helps neutralize that. Other times they're testing things like, is it really driving more growth? So they'll do something called like blackout testing,
Right.
where they remove the option to pay with DCB and then see if conversion drops, right? And if it doesn't, then they'll just permanently remove it. And so that does happen. It's not that widespread, though, I have to say. While I think the activation of DCB isn't quite as robust as it used to be, I don't see them all unplugging either.
So,
and I think
so
they want to make sure consumers have that
so,
choice.
so when they carry out this test, I mean, do you know whether in most cases they actually see that DCB is valuable, or
I think where there is wider access to, say, credit cards, then the tests tend to be less less fruitful for DCB.
right.
Because, but if it's a lot of prepaid, DCB, well, I'm sorry, postpaid DCB, when it's dominant, it converts better than cards.
Right.
And so that's pretty powerful.
Right. Can you tell us a bit about the journey, Boku's journey, right? Because and why you kind of like went from sort of being focused on telco and DCB, and you were looking at a mobile identity as well. And then you sort of decided to pivot, well, not pivot, but a bit to to sort of like embrace other payment methods.
Yeah, we came at a time when digital content was moving from physical media to digital access, right? You're not buying game discs and DVDs anymore, and CDs. Everything's coming in through your phone. And being able to monetize that content on the phone on a global scale was kind of the mission at hand, and the ubiquity of that SIM card was very powerful. I think over time what we realize is as cross-border commerce, global e-commerce continues to grow in the same direction as digital, because digital kind of went global very quickly. But now even physical commerce and other types of services now are equally global with the same aspirations. We still kind of maintain, like, what is that local payment on the phone that is very easy to access, that is not rely on the Visa, MasterCard rails? And so, to me, DCB is just the first form of local mobile payment. And then now with smartphones, you can use apps, whether it's a banking app or it's a fintech app. It's sort of, to me, the same category. So we didn't want to see ourselves as a DCB company. We saw ourselves as a payment company focused on local payments and non-card payments.
Right. Does anyone have any questions for Adam? No. How much time do we have left? Okay. So, you mentioned that. So another area you look at is, or you're doing bundling enablement, and so
that's right.
Yeah, and that is kind of like. I mean, what are some of the trends you're seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, bundling, again, the app stores are crowded, and it is costly to promote yourself in the app stores and facilitate acquisition. Bundling is a way to have a hyper-curated way of presenting to your customers as a telco things that they believe will enrich their lifestyle, and whether it's video, games, or music, or AI, or software and cloud services, that makes a lot of sense. You can do a lot of interesting things, like not just with the promotions, but zero rating the data that other distributors can't do. But again, that is built around the invoice, and it's built around this credit relationship you have with the consumer. You asked, like, one thing that I've never really seen, although I thought would be an interesting area of potential expansion, is during this period, the last 5-10 years, BNPL has become a huge thing in e-commerce. It's an alternative source of credit, especially out here in Asia. Credit isn't always easy to come by. Yet everybody's postpaid phone is a micro source of credit that's just used for small purchases. Now, certainly carriers will facilitate sort of a BNPL for financing for their device, for their phone. Can you also expand that and be a bigger player in e-commerce? Like, put my purchase of e-commerce along, 4 installments, 6 installments, just like a phone would. I think there are different ways to sort of build other auxiliary opportunities around that, because I think that is a very powerful relationship that isn't very common.
Okay, so you think there's a potential for telcos to play in that buy now, pay later space via the sort of DCB channel?
I think so, because
Right.
early on, playing in the wallet space, certainly, there's been some instances of success. Why not venture in that direction, right? That rather than going the prepaid wallet route, go into the BNPL route.
Right.
Building off of credit rather than debit.
Right.
It could be interesting. It's also a space that isn't fully saturated. There are some big companies like Klarna, Afterpay, Affirm, but it's just an idea.
Yeah.
Because as I said, that credit is very, very powerful for acquiring users and converting, whether it's bundling or just as a payment instrument for gaming.
Great. Yeah.
I guess part of your presentation, Guillermo, and what you are talking about, this local e-wallets, and there seems to be a lot of them in every country, even the region. Are we seeing oversupply of e-wallets, and is there going to be a consolidation? And what is there specific verticals that they might be focusing on? I mean, where does this whole growth of wallets, are we still in the early stage, or what are your thoughts around the future of that?
Yeah, when we started integrating wallets, there were so many, and the question was, which ones should we prioritize? And I used to pay attention to who's raising the most money, because it costs so much money to acquire customers. But also, over time, it's who's going to survive. Because even if you did get the market share, are you going to have enough money to sort of build a durable business? And as I mentioned earlier, those that rely entirely on payment revenue were pretty vulnerable. But those that had built their business as being a media company, selling distribution and advertising, selling financial services as a digital bank, selling or even being tied to e-commerce or marketplaces, whether it's food delivery, cab rides, those companies have a much richer, a much more stable business than those that are just like a payment app, because a payment app is likely to just get disrupted by instant banking.
Yep. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I have a quick question. Given the ruling between Epic, Fortnite, and Apple, are you seeing a trend where more and more developers are moving out of the Apple Pay, Google Pay ecosystem?
Yeah.
I mean, are you seeing that, or you probably not incremental, but like a transition from one to the other?
I mean, for the big brands, they're the companies that have wanted it the most, right? To leave the store and not be beholden to 30%, App Store tax. The subscription services had done that sort of early on, even without the steerage ruling. Now it's a little bit easier because you can, in fact, put in the app like, hey, link out. But if you do link out of there, you're still paying up to 20% because now Apple has all these other fees that are non-payment related. Smaller game companies, they're getting like 3% off if they steer away. So it's like rather than paying 15%, they're paying 12%. So it's not a massive savings. And yeah, exactly. And when you click out, there's a little warning button, that warning window that says like, hey, you're about to leave. That might not be secure, and you lose conversion as well. So I think most app publishers are going to stay put. Only the biggest companies like a Tencent will be able to steer at least their heaviest gamers to an off-store sort of website where they can top up their money, top up their stored value, typically at a better exchange rate, and so the big gamers will know how to do that. But we were working with Tinder for a long time trying to get out of the App Store because for them it's billions of dollars that they're splitting 30% on. But the experience is really hard to circumnavigate when the point of impulse purchase is inside the app. It's hard to steer them out. So unfortunately, I haven't seen a massive move yet.
Yeah, I think they've made it as unattractive as possible for developers to escape their ecosystem.
Yeah.
Any more questions, or shall we wrap it up? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks
very
a
much.
lot, Adam. Yeah, great.
Thank you.